The time-staggered nature of the industrialization process, from Britain to Germany to Russia and northwestern Europe and Japan to Korea to Canada and Spain, means that much of the world's population faces mass retirements, followed by population crashes at roughly the same time. The world's demographic structure passed the point of no return 20 to 40 years ago. The 2020s are the decade when it all breaks apart. For countries as varied as China, Russia, Japan, Germany, Italy, South Korea, Ukraine, Canada, Malaysia, Taiwan, Romania, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Austria, the question isn't when these countries will age into demographic obsolescence. All will see their worker cadres pass into mass retirement in the 2020s. None have sufficient young people to even pretend to regenerate their populations. All suffer from terminal demographics. The real questions are how and how soon do their societies crack apart? And do they deflate in silence or lash out against the dying of the light? Coming up behind them rapidly is another cadre of countries whose birth rates have dropped even faster, and so who will face a similar demographic disintegration in the 2030s and 2040s. Brazil, Spain, Thailand, Poland, Australia, Cuba, Greece, Portugal, Hungary, and Switzerland. Even further forward, in the 2050s, are countries who started their birth rate collapse a bit later, and so who may have a chance to avoid demographic dissolution if they can get today's 20 and 30-somethings to have a whole mess of kids. But honestly, these late arrivals' birth rate collapses have been so severe it doesn't look great. Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Mexico, Vietnam, Iran, Turkey, Morocco, Uzbekistan, Saudi Arabia, Chile, the Czech Republic. The next batch of countries, mostly in the poorer parts of Latin America or sub-Saharan Africa or the Middle East, are even more concerning. Their demographic structures are younger, far younger, but that doesn't mean they are in a better position, because there is more to economic and demographic health than just numbers and ages. In most cases, these countries are extractive economies that ship out this or that raw commodity, using the proceeds to supply their population with imported food and/or consumer goods. In many ways, they've managed to access portions of the industrialization process, most notably lower mortality, more reliable food supplies, increased urbanization, and population booms, without experiencing the bits that make advancement stick: increased educational levels, a modernized state, a value-added economic system, social progress, industrial development, or technological achievement. In a safe, globalized world, such a hybridization model can limp along so long as the commodities flow out and the money flows in. But in an unsafe, fractured world where trade is sharply circumscribed, outright national collapse will by far not be the biggest problem these peoples face. In these countries, the very population is vulnerable to changes farther abroad. The industrial technologies that reduce mortality and raise standards of living cannot be uninvented, but if trade collapses, these technologies can be denied. Should anything impact these countries' commodity outflows or the income or product inflows, the entire place will break down while experiencing deep-rooted famine on a biblical scale. Economic development, quality of life, longevity, health, and demographic expansion are all subject to the whims of globalization, or rather, in this case, de-globalization.
Demography forms one of the cornerstones of how we look at the world. Geopolitics means a lot of things depending on who you ask. But for myself and my team, geopolitics at its core is the synthesis of the study of geography, demographics, and economy. That's not to say things like military prowess, agricultural capability, and more aren't important. But they're secondary, in that they are shaped by factors like the quality of arable land and the amount of people you can put into factories or militaries or sell goods to. Enter this graphic from my book, The End of the World is Just the Beginning. We have a visual comparison of various historic birth rates for the last 170 years or so. Rises in birth rates, like for the US and Australia through in the 50s and early 60s, correspond with the post-war baby boom. This is the last peak for most developed countries, who all saw a decline in the number of children born per woman as their respective industrial revolutions took hold and a rural to urban societal shift took place. There are a couple broad trends to note. Birth rates across the world, regardless of culture, religion, per capita GDP, have experienced a precipitous decline in recent decades. Egypt is an outlier, as are countries who have accepted significant numbers of immigrants or refugees relative to their population, like Germany, Turkey, and Iran. But the starkest decline is the thick, unbroken line in black. That's China, and it's bad. We've had indications for a while now that China was already one of the fastest aging populations in the world, but with recent revisions of their population data coming to light last year, we know that not only are they perhaps the fastest aging population in the world, their birth rate is one of the lowest. Only Spain's and South Korea's are lower and just barely. When we talk about themes like the end of more in the book, we discuss how the Bretton Woods system allowed countries without the demographic wealth of pre-industrial China to use CCP-subsidized labor as part of globe-spanning supply chains. Chinese labor costs have increased handily in the last decade or two, but there's more to the Chinese ticking demographic bomb than rising labor costs. China's population is aging, and elderly people need more capital and labor for their care than young people. They consume less. They produce less. China is going to need more money to care for a growing segment of its population that is increasingly dependent on the state, with less young people to produce and consume the goods manufacturing that is the bedrock of the Chinese economy. Failing to do so would be untenable in any Confucian society that reveres its elders. For a China whose ruling Communist Party's legitimacy is anchored to upholding a social welfare contract, failure is suicidal. Which still says nothing about a global manufacturing economy that since the end of the Cold War has had one foot planted firmly in China.